Welcome to Biblical Demand, and today our guest is Dr. Peter J. Gentry, who is a senior professor of the Old Testament at the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary and a distinguished visiting professor of the Old Testament and senior research fellow of the Text and Canon Institute at Phoenix Seminary. Also, he's the author and co-author of Kingdom Through Covenant: How to Read and Understand the Biblical Prophets. It's a joy to have you here, sir.
Thank you very kindly. I'm glad to be with you.
So let us begin with your story. Tell us about your story. How did you come to know Jesus Christ?
Well, I grew up in a Christian home. My father and mother were missionaries in the Philippine Islands. I lived in the Philippine Islands until I was almost 6. But I'm originally from Canada. And when we came back to Canada, one night I was helping my mother dry the dishes, and my father was away, and my mother shattered my philosophy of life. So I had a very simple philosophy of life. I believed that it was important to be good, and I believed that I was good. So everything was working well until my mother shattered my philosophy of life, and she showed that I wasn't good, and that I would not be given eternal life because I was a sinner, and I had rebelled against God. And so she pointed me to Jesus Christ. She pointed me to his death on the cross as the atoning sacrifice for our sin, and I put my faith and trust in Jesus Christ. So I was 6 years old.
That's great. So we know that you are the professor of the Old Testament, and you must have heard this question a lot of times, many times. Even I'm very curious about Genesis, especially first 3 chapters of the Genesis. I love to read about first 3 chapters, how it all happened, how it all started, how fall happened. So when we read in Genesis 1 and verse 31 that God saw all that he made and it was very good, then where did this Satan come from in the picture? Because we assume that God made everything good.
Yes.
Either, or we can say that serpent was good, but he came in the form of serpent who became bad. What is the mysteries? I know there are no definite answer to this, but what is
Yes.
your opinion on that?
Well, I love the book of Genesis. In 2021, I was asked to teach the early chapters, and I spent 8 months explaining the first 3 chapters of Genesis. And a lot of Christians cannot accept this answer, but the Bible doesn't tell us where evil came from. The Bible tells us how evil entered the world. So the Christian faith is not like other religions. It doesn't begin with a big genealogy of angels that goes down to Shaitan and blames all the evil in the world upon Shaitan or Satan. The Bible shows us very clearly how evil entered our world. It entered our world through the disobedience of Adam and Eve to the express will of God. But it doesn't explain where Satan came from, and it doesn't explain why he was rebellious against God. The church, there are church fathers who have believed that Isaiah 14 is talking about the fall of Satan, and there are church fathers who believe that Ezekiel 28 is talking about the fall of Satan. There's a series of videos on YouTube called Honest Answers, put out by Southern Seminary, and I did one of those on Isaiah 14 and Ezekiel 28. And Isaiah 14 is the first principle of interpretation is to look at the context It's talking about the king of Babylon. And it's what it is it's a funeral song. It's a funeral song or parody. The Hebrew word is mashal. A mashal involves a parable or a comparison or a parody. It's based on 2 Samuel 1. So in 2 Samuel 1, you have a funeral song for Saul and his sons, and the author of Isaiah is creating a parody of this funeral song, and he's comparing the king of Babylon to a Canaanite myth. And in this Canaanite myth, one of the younger gods tries to supplant Baal or Baal, the chief god of the pantheon, and he's thrown down for his arrogance and his pride. And so it's a funeral song, and it's all about the king of Babylon coming into the underworld, the abode of the dead. And in Ezekiel 28 is also very clearly, according to the context, a taunt against the king of Tyre, and he's compared to Adam. Adam was a king and priest, and so he's described in kingly terms and in priestly terms. He's described in terms of the garments of the high priest with all the precious stones. In our book, Kingdom Through Covenant, I explain how you can see from Genesis 1 and 2, just from Genesis 1 and 2, that Adam was not only established by God as a king, but he was established by God as a priest. He was a worshiper of God in the Garden of Eden. And so the king of Tyre is compared to Adam in Ezekiel 28 and his arrogance and pride in turning against God. So as much as we would like to have information, the Bible does not give us a narrative about the fall of Satan. He just suddenly there appears in Genesis 3 this snake who is clearly symbolic of an evil power, and this evil power is opposed to God and seeks to get Adam and Eve to disobey God. And there's no explanation anywhere in the Bible of where Satan comes from. We can assume, for example, there's a passage in Job 38 that talks about God creating the world, and all the angels or the sons of God were shouting for joy. So it seems that the angels were there before God created the earth, but we have no information on where Satan came from and the origin of evil. The only thing the Bible tells us is how evil entered the world. By one man, sin entered the world, and death through sin. So therefore, death passed upon all men because all sinned. Romans 5:12. That's a very good, a very clear and concise interpretation of Genesis 1 to 3.
Absolutely. That there is no definitive answer in the Bible given, but we know that evil is there, and Satan came,
Yes.
but we do not have the clear answer to that.
The Bible doesn't answer all of our questions.
Yes.
We are in a broken relationship with God, and it shows us how that broken relationship can be restored through the work of Jesus Christ. But it doesn't answer many questions that we have.
When we read Genesis 1 to 11, that many people believe that it is a literal story, some believe it is a poetic or a mytho history. So what do you think about that? Genesis 1 to 11, is it literal or poetic or mytho history?
I think it's a historical account. It's a historical account. You know, it certainly uses figures of speech. It certainly uses it uses symbols. So for example, Adam and Eve were naked. Well, for that, their nakedness was literal. They were literally naked. They had no clothes on. But the nakedness is also a symbol of their innocence. So the text the text is communicating at a literal level and at a symbolic level at the same time. But I take it uh, there's a new book by Vern Poythress uh, on Eden, interpreting Eden. It's called. It's a very good book, and it deals with some of these questions.
Okay, perfect. So Genesis 1 to 11, it's a literal word of God, not just mytho-history or poetic.
Yes, and there
Absolutely.
are people now. There are some scholars. There are some archaeologists who are even showing archaeological evidence for some of the things that have taken place in Genesis 1 to 11, like the
Hmm.
Tower of Babel, and I mean, it shouldn't be hard to believe in a universal flood. Every nation in the world has a flood story.
Absolutely. In India, it also has a flood story.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So
Okay, so
go ahead.
yeah, so moving on to the next question is that um, why do we believe that sin entered when Adam ate the fruit, but Genesis says that Eve ate the fruit first? Maybe there could be interpretation like that God gave commandment to Adam, not to Eve, and Adam passed that commandment to Eve. So
Yes.
is it, how do you answer that?
This is an extremely important question, and the answer is that Adam is the federal head of the human race. The word federal comes from the Latin word foedus and means covenant. So he's the covenant head of the first humanity. Uh, 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 he's uh, in our book Kingdom Through Covenant. I have a long explanation showing that when God created the world and He made humans, He made he established a covenant relationship. And this is indicated by the meaning of the words likeness and image. I show that in the ancient Near East, the words likeness and image indicate a covenant relationship between God and humans on the one hand that could be expressed by the idea of obedient sonship. We're called to be God's obedient son and daughters. And the word image has communicates the idea of kingship, especially servant kingship. So it's emphasizing the relationship of man to the world. So these words, likeness and image, clearly show that there is a covenant relationship uh, between God and man on the one hand, and man and the world on the other hand, that can be summarized by the ideas of obedient sonship and servant kingship. And Adam was given the leadership in that covenant community. Uh, this is clear in the Bible because he God gives names to everything that is God gives names to everything that is created on the first 3 days, but Adam gives names to everything that is created on on days 4, 5, and 6. And when he gives names to when he in the ancient Near East, when you give a name to something, it shows that you have insight into the character of that thing and that you have some kind of mastery over it. So when Adam gives names to the animals, he's exercising his kingship over the world. That God called him to exercise. And Adam name when the woman is created, Adam calls her woman, which in Hebrew, Isha is the feminine form of Ish. So he gives her the same name as him, showing that they are equal before God, but he also is the one giving the name. So he's the leader in the relationship. And so the reason why uh, sin entered when Adam ate the fruit is because he's the covenant head. And This is obviously the understanding that Paul has in Romans chapter 5. We could say, what is Adam? Is he just a biological progenitor? Is that all he is? Well, that wouldn't explain the relationship that Paul draws between Adam and Christ in Romans chapter 5. Adam is the head of all the humanity in the first creation, and Jesus Christ is the head of all the humanity in the new creation humanity, the new covenant humanity that will inherit the new heavens and the new earth. So, I've shown that I've tried to explain this from Genesis 1 to 3, and I've tried to show that this is the interpretation of the New Testament as well.
Absolutely, I totally agree with that.
Yeah. So, and you know, when you look at the account in Genesis 3, Adam seems to be right there he seems to be very close by when she takes the fruit, and it doesn't seem to be a deal of difference in time when she eats and then he eats. So, but the point is, he's the covenant head and mediator, and so the responsibility falls upon him.
And he should be blamed for this.
Yes.
Great. Okay, so we read that when the fall happened, Adam ate the fruit, Eve ate the fruit. Now we see that how the story goes on, and we see that God is intervening and he's keep giving the laws and the commandments to the people. So the question is, if man cannot be saved through the laws and commandments, then why God did gave the commandments?
Yeah.
I mean, right?
Yes.
Christ came at the right time. We believe that he came 2000 years back. Many question that why didn't he came when Adam sinned? He should have come at that time. Why so many laws and commandments we had to go through?
Yes. Well, this is an excellent question, and I deal with it in great depth in our book Kingdom Through Covenant. First of all, the law was never given so that people could be saved. It was given to Israel after God had delivered them and rescued them from Egypt. So it was a covenant. It was a covenant given to Israel, who were already redeemed. They were already saved. It was given to show them how to live in the land in relationship to God and in relationship to each other. So that's the first part of the answer. The second part of the answer is, one of the things that's happening in the storyline of the Bible is that God is showing that humans are not very good covenant partners. So if you're in a covenant relationship, a relationship of commitment, you're committed to each other, you're devoted to each other, you're loyal, there's faith, there's trust, there's obedience. It's a covenant relationship. It's not a business relationship. It's like a marriage where you're in there for life. First of all, you have God creates Adam and Eve, and then the story goes down the toilet pretty quickly. Chapter 3, Adam and Eve sin. Then God makes a new start. God makes a new start with Noah. And as soon as Noah gets off the boat, we have this story of the drunkenness of Noah. We see that he's not a very good covenant partner. And then God calls Abram, and he enters into a covenant relationship with Abram. But then Abram goes and sells his wife out, and God has to say, look, Abram, walk before me and be blameless. You can't have a relationship with me unless you're going to have some moral standards here. And so the Bible is teaching us that humans are not very good covenant partners, and that's one of the purposes of the law. Paul talks about this in in Romans and Galatians and other parts of the New Testament, the law came to reveal our sinfulness, to show us that we're not very good. We're not faithful. We're not loyal. We're not committed to the covenant relationship. We're prone to fall. We're prone to fall away. We're prone to go our own way and disregard God and his instructions for our lives. So the law was never given in order so that a group of people could be saved. It was given to a people who were already saved to show them how to live, and another purpose of the law was to show them that in and of themselves they are unfaithful covenant partners, and only God. So you see this. Let me show you this in Deuteronomy chapter 30. Let me see if I can find this very quickly. Deuteronomy chapter 30. Okay, let's see, where is it? Or is it in chapter 29? He says that God has not given you a heart to know. Okay, chapter 29. Deuteronomy 29, Moses summoned all Israel and said to them, you have seen all that the Lord did before your eyes in the land of Egypt, to Pharaoh and to all his servants and to all his land, the great trials that your eyes saw, the signs and those great wonders. But to this day, the Lord has not given you a heart to understand, or eyes to see, or ears to hear. So, and late in chapter 30, he says that in the future, God will circumcise their hearts. So it's a figure of speech. Circumcision is a ceremony or rite or ritual where they cut off the foreskin to show that they are completely devoted to the service of God. So circumcision was used in ancient Egypt. Only the Pharaoh, only his chief officers and his chief military people were circumcised, because only they were totally devoted to the service of God. But in Israel, everyone is circumcised because the whole nation is supposed to be devoted to the service of God. And yet their hearts are not devoted to God. That's the whole point. And so they need to go through a period of learning. The history of Israel is going to show them that they need God to sovereignly come and change their hearts.
Yeah, absolutely. Many of the people ask this question, is that how the story of Israel, history of Israel is relevant to us today, to like someone sitting in India. Why should I bother to read the history of Israel? Maybe in Africa, people must be asking, why should I care to read about the history of Israel? So because definitely it connects to the New Testament. So
Yes.
why, so
Well,
Israel is.
what happens is Paul explains this in Romans 3, and I'll read this verse. Romans chapter 3. He says, now we know that this is Romans 3, verse 19. We know that whatever the law says, it speaks to those who are under the law, so that every mouth may be stopped and the whole world may be held accountable to God. Well, how does that work? It says that the law speaks to those who are under the law, so it's only addressing the people who are in the covenant relationship, but in reality, every person becomes guilty before God. How does that work? Well, the only way that can work, is that Israel has stood the test for the whole world. So if you create a group of human beings who have all of the advantages in the world, all of the intellectual advantages, all of the good, who they have all the physical things. They have good bodies and good families, and they have the best things in the world. You give them the best of everything. They're emotionally healthy. You give them the best of everything. And what happens? They're not good covenant partners. So Israel's Israel is a witness to the whole world that none of us are faithful covenant partners to God on our own.
Absolutely. Despite having all the resources, we are not the good covenant part.
Yeah, Israel stands the test for the whole world.
Mm.
Israel is showing the world that if God gives every opportunity and every blessing and every advantage, humans are not going to be good covenant partners.
Mm. Absolutely. I totally agree with that. And and when we read the Old Testament canon, um, it's called Tanakh, Torah, Nevi'im, and Ketuvim. So, who is there a individual or a group of people who decided the order, like Genesis, then Exodus,
Yes.
Leviticus? So, how it all
Well,
happened?
yes. I want to keep this. I want to answer as briefly as possible because this could be a long
Mm,
discussion. But first of all, we need to realize that the arrangement in the Hebrew Bible or Jewish Bible is different from the arrangement in our Bibles today. The Hebrew Bible or the Jewish Bible is divided into three sections. Torah, T stands for Torah, the law or the Pentateuch or the first five books. And as you pointed out, Tanakh, N, stands for Nevi'im, the prophets. This is divided into two sections, the former prophets, Joshua, Judges, Samuel, Kings, the latter prophets, the original order, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and the 12, or actually Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Isaiah, and the 12. And then all the rest of the books are in the writings, and the writings is divided into two parts: history books and books that are not history. So first of all, I want to explain the rationale behind this arrangement. In each section, there is history plus something else. So in the Torah or Pentateuch, there's history plus laws. So the name comes from the something else. In the second section, there's history plus prophecy. The name comes from the something else. In the third section, there's history plus writings. The history books are Daniel, Esther, Ezra, Nehemiah, and Chronicles. And the other books are Ruth, Psalms, Job, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, a Song of Solomon, Lamentations. So, so that each section has history plus something else, and the oldest arrangement that we know of is a saying, a rabbinic saying in the Babylonian Talmud. It's called Baba. The source is Baba Bathra 14b, Baba Bathra 14b, and it's a baraita. A baraita is a saying that comes somewhere between the 1st century and 240 AD, 240 CE. So it's very early, and it gives the order that it gives this order. And what happens is the history books are arranged chronologically, and the other books are arranged in order of size. So in Baba Bathra 14b, in the prophets you have Jeremiah, because that's the longest text, Ezekiel, that's the second longest text, Isaiah, that's the third longest text, and then the 12 minor prophets are put on one scroll, and that's the fourth. So the history books are arranged in order of size. Sorry, the history books are arranged chronologically, and the other books were arranged in order of size. Now, if we go what you might ask the question, well, why was this? Why was? Where did this arrangement come from? Well, there was a book written about 200 BC, called The Wisdom of Jesus ben Sirach. or Ben Sira or Ecclesiasticus. It has different names. And it was translated into Greek around 130 BC by the grandson of the guy who wrote it. And when he translated it, he made a preface. So when you translate a book, you get a preface from the translator. And in the preface, he talks about the law and the prophecies and the other books. 3 times he talks about the law and the prophecies and the other books. So this threefold division goes back to the 2nd century BC, if not much earlier. It may well go back to the time of Ezra and Nehemiah, but we don't have exact evidence.
Mm-hmm.
But we know that there was this threefold division, and then we know from Baba Batra 14b how the books were arranged before the invention of the book. So, for example, this is what we call a codex. The codex, the kind of books that we have today, were invented between the 2nd century AD and the 4th century AD.
Uh-huh.
So before that, the Jewish people used rolls or scrolls. So the Bible would be an armload of scrolls. And it's very the scrolls were kept in the temple. This is standard all across the ancient Near East. Temples were used as libraries. So the scrolls were kept in the temple, and if there was an arrangement, they were arranged on the shelves. And so everyone would know the arrangement because the arrangement was there on the shelves. After the fall of Jerusalem in AD 70, there was no temple, and that's why this tradition had to be put into writing, because it was still a collection of scrolls, but there was no temple to show the arrangement. So that's my explanation.
That's pretty convincing, and I think as you mentioned that the Jewish people have the different order as the English Bible we have in the different orders, right?
Yes, so the order that we have today seems to come from the Septuagint, and it's based on genre: law, history, poetry, prophecy. So they've arranged the books by genre and not according to the arrangement in the Hebrew Bible.
When you say they means the the Jewish people or rabbis
Christians.
or
the Christians.
Okay.
Are
Then it was
Christians.
translated into a Greek Septuagint, right?
Well, the Bible was translated from Hebrew and Aramaic into Greek in the 3rd and 2nd century BC by Jewish people, but the oldest manuscripts are Codex Sinaiticus and Codex Vaticanus. Those are the oldest manuscripts, and they're not Jewish manuscripts, they're Christian manuscripts. So they're showing us they're showing us the Christian arrangement, they're not showing us the Jewish arrangement.
Jewish, absolutely. And related to this question is we found about the Cairo Genizah text.
Yes.
So, right, the story I have heard is like that there was a synagogue in Cairo, Egypt. They wanted to expand that synagogue. So when they expanded the wall, they found some passage and it was filled with a lot of scrolls. So is that right? Or is the story goes like this, or how authentic is that?
When a book is worn out, or a scroll is worn out, the Jewish people don't throw it out. Their Jewish practice was to put it into storage. The Hebrew word to store away is ganaz, and Genizah is the storage place. So it's like in the United States of America, when a flag is worn out, you don't put it in the garbage. There's a proper way to deal with it. So when the Jewish people, when their books were worn out, they stored them away in a storage place, and the Hebrew word Genizah means a storage place. Well, in the 1880s and 1890s, they they discovered all the manuscripts in the Genizah of the old Jewish synagogue in Cairo, and these manuscripts that were stored there are from the 6th century to the 19th century. Wikipedia says there were over 400,000 uh, pieces, fragments of 400,000 documents. About 25,000 of these are biblical texts. And most of these texts, most of these texts, there's a lot of, still have to be studied, but the answer is they're just like our Masoretic text. They're like our Tiberian text that we have today. So we have from the Cairo Genizah about 7 manuscripts that come from between 300 and 700 AD, and they're all exactly like our later Masoretic text. So the Cairo Genizah is important because it shows the faithful transmission of the text.
Absolutely. That's a good. So I got the meaning of Cairo. Genizah. Genizah means the storage of this
Yeah.
place where you keep the. Okay, and this is the series of transmission that from this Cairo Genizah text. Then we have the Dead Sea Scrolls, right? So it
No, the Dead
like
Sea Scroll. The Dead Sea Scrolls are from the Judean desert of Israel.
Qumran with
Yeah,
Qumran caves, right?
yeah. The Cairo Genizah is a different set of documents. They're from the this old synagogue in Cairo. Most of them are in the Cambridge University Library today, and there's a catalog of all the biblical texts produced by Ben Uthwaite in 4 volumes. You can if you go to that, you can there's a complete an exhaustive description of all the manuscripts, 25,000 fragments of biblical texts.
Wow, that's amazing. So moving on to the last question, which I ask my every guest, that what advice would you give to the young Christians or Christian youth who are influenced in this internet age by culture, philosophies, and other worldviews? How to, stay on the right track?
Yes, well, the I've spent my life training men and women for ministry, and a good part of that is teaching them Greek and Hebrew, because if they every generation has to be able to go back to the sources to determine if what they're being taught is true. One of the difficulties today with the internet is it's very hard to know what the sources are. Where is this information coming from? How reliable is it? And can it be verified? And the thing that I would emphasize for Christian young people is you've got to spend a lot of time reading and studying the Word of God, studying the Scriptures, so that the Bible shapes your worldview. The Bible has to shape your outlook on life, and I told you earlier that in 2021, so that's now almost 2 years ago, I was asked by the church leaders of the church where I was to teach the early chapters of Genesis, and I spent 8 months on Genesis 1 to 3. Uh, uh, so 8 months is like four times 8. It's about 30 lectures, 30 lectures on those 3 chapters, and all of our foundations, are in those chapters. And what you believe about the first verse of the Bible will determine what you believe about the rest of the Bible. So It's and one of the things that we need to realize is whenever there's a new technology, there's a new morality that goes along with it. So we have to be very careful as Christians to see what the impact of this new technology is on our lifestyle.
Mm.
For
Absolutely. I think this is a great advice that first we need to throw ourselves into the scripture and let us not consume if we are consuming some content, so we need to verify where this sources come from and where it is come from, right? Just to
yeah,
stay on the right track.
yeah. So if you notice when you ask me a question, I give you the answer and I tell you my source so that you can go check it out for yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. So it was a really a great conversation with you, sir. And I mean, the all those questions which I prepared was answered, and I believe it will help the listeners as well.